Hi, my name is Daniella, and you're listening to the Audacious Path podcast, the one and only podcast that is aimed specifically at adventure creators just like you and me. Every 2 weeks, I talk to other creators in the adventure sphere and I ask them about how they started, grew, and monetized their adventure creator business. In today's conversation, I'm talking to Ken and April from Living a Stout Life. Now, I'm really interested in this conversation because Ken and April did not follow a linear path on their journey to become full-time creators, and yet they have found a way to make it financially sustainable, which is what we all want, right? In this conversation, we go through and talk about what did that process look like? How did they get there? What kind of questions were they asking themselves? And how did they think about which platforms they decided to use? I hope you guys learn a lot from this episode. You can find them online, YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook at Living a Stout Life, or on their website, livingastoutlife.com. They have heaps of resources for anyone who's looking to do any craft beer travel in the USA. And of course, you guys can send me a DM if you have any comments or questions at The Audacious Path, and enjoy the episode. To start out with, if you guys could just give me kind of a background of what you were doing before you started Living a Stout Life and what led you to start it.
I was running a mixed martial arts website and mixed martial arts news website for about, 15, 20 years before we started Living a Stout Life. So I was basically in sports reporting.
And you were already like nomad. You didn't have to go into an office or anything. It was already digital work. Yes. And then I was teaching because we were basically in a brick house in Denver, Colorado, that we had lived in forever. And so I was a teacher and we were trying to find out what the next chapter of our lives was going to look like. And we moved into an RV. And so I quit teaching. He kept working and we figured half the expenses, half the income. Yeah, that didn't work so well.
Oh dear. Hasn't panned out?
Well, after 5 years, it's been okay. But that first part is like, what do you do when you start to travel right away? When you're traveling everywhere for vacation, for example, what are you doing? You're spending money, right? You're going out to restaurants, you're going out to eat, you're checking out the different breweries, you're checking out the different museums or entertainment. And so it's the same thing when you go and live on the road. You think you're going to do all that same stuff because you're checking out all these new places. So it turns out you're spending more money than you thought.
Well, that's the difference between doing it for fun and doing it for a lifestyle, I think. And it seems like you guys evolved into that. Was there an impetus or something that like made this like something you had to do?
I think with us, we had this kind of a plan when our youngest, we have 2 boys, they're both grown up and out on their own, doing their own things now. But the reason we started doing what we're doing in our lifestyle now is basically we had a plan where when our youngest was in college, we were going to move to the mountains because we were living in Denver. So we were going to move to the mountains and I'd still teach and find a job. But it turned out when we were looking for a house in the mountains, it's expensive. We'd have to have another mortgage, more bills. I couldn't find a job that was going to afford us to do that. And so it was just kind of this frustrating piece, especially for me, where I'm like, why am I allowing somebody else to dictate what I want to do if I can't find this job and now I can't move to the mountains? And so it just became like, well, we like to travel. What else could we do? How could we make something that we want to work? So instead of moving to the mountains, we realized, we listened to a podcast, go figure, that people could live and work from an RV. And so we were thinking, well, we like to travel. And so why not look into this RV thing and figure out a company that we can do while traveling and move into the next chapter of our lives and do that instead.
And you guys are quite unique in that you're not just doing adventure, but you're also focusing on craft beer. So how did you guys get to that being your focus? And what would you say is the mission of your business?
Finding that focus took us a while. We had the name Living a Stout Life pretty quickly because we realized it could be a very wide-ranging kind of topic because it has a double meaning. Of course, it kind of ties into beer with Living a Stout Life. And we had already been craft beer like nerds in Denver just in our spare time. That's what we love to do. And then Living a Stout Life also meant, when we were moving into the RV, it was like we were going to go live an intentional life instead of letting someone else, like April was saying, dictate where you could work, where you could live, where you could play.
So the word stout was like a full-bodied, intentional meaning. It had to do with beer, but it didn't have to always do with beer. And then
So it took a lot of searching in the beginning, though, because, when you move into the RV and we like hooked up with a lot of other groups that were working from the road and living from the road. and they all tended to focus on how to live in an RV or how to fix an RV or different things about the RV, and that RV life. And we were like, we just didn't feel like we were experts in that yet, and we didn't feel like we had much to offer in that realm yet. So we were like, why do we want to do what everybody else is doing just because we all live in an RV? And so as we traveled around kind of finding our way, we kept going to breweries like we always did in Denver. And it's like, this is what we want to do. And it was also trying to find adventures and places to camp and things like that whenever we did go to breweries.
So I was going to say it turned into a focus of more like writing about the stories behind the beer and the giving people guides. So when they go to a new city, they can find the different breweries that they want to go to based off of our brewery guides. And then beer has always been to us about more than just the beer. It's about the people in the community that you meet around that beer. And so that's why we are always also talking about the stories behind the beer and those guides, because that's what was missing for us is when we would go to a big city like Austin, for example, and had never been there. I mean, it's a city of like 3 million people, and it's a huge like area for breweries. And for us, I couldn't find what I needed to tell me where to go if we're only going to be there for a couple of days. So that was like that kind of missing piece. So I wrote a whole guide on like how to find the Austin breweries. And so that's kind of where that came from.
And I want to take your story and see what lessons I can pull out of it for other creators that are basically in the beginning and trying to figure out, well, where do I focus? What tips would you have or advice would you have for someone who's like, well, where do I focus? It seems like it was quite organic in one way, but were there things you were doing along the way to like help that process or figure out what would work? I mean, it seems like for one thing, you identified a problem and you were providing a solution. That's a good place to start. But what else?
I don't think we identified the problem originally. We knew we wanted to focus on beer and travel and the things we like to do while we were traveling for beer, which usually centered around like mountain biking and snowboarding, things like that. So our original start was basically mostly just telling the stories behind brewers and breweries that we found interesting. And that wasn't really solving a problem too much. But when we kind of decided, we have a hard time finding breweries in places, and it's like there was no just center point where to go and say, where are all the great breweries when I go to Tucson, or where are all the great breweries when I go to Asheville or wherever. And so it kind of started to connect that we could be the guide for people, especially people who travel for beer and want to do other things besides just go to the breweries, but also to connect people with those breweries through the stories behind them.
Here's the thing is when we first started, we spread ourselves very thin. We were like, we're going to be on Instagram. We're going to be on Facebook. We're going to be on YouTube. We're going to write the blog posts. We're going to we're going to do all of this. And someone had said to us with our YouTube, because our first foray into it was basically YouTube video, like basically podcasting via YouTube. And someone asked us a question like, do you guys even watch YouTube videos? And we're like, well, or interviews. And we're like, not really. And then he's like, well, then why are you on YouTube? He's like, if you're not watching it and if you're not interested in it, then why are you on it? And so he's like, he was telling it and just kind of had a hit there is like to find out what you're interested in when you're searching for something. So if you're going to be a content creator, what do you find yourself drawn to when you're looking for something else? And maybe that is where you should kind of start with what you're going to be creating content on, because there's so much out there and you can't do every single thing. It's just too thin, and then you can't focus on it, and you just lose that expertise in that.
Well, one piece of advice that I received was to always try to find a problem that like a past version of you had. So you're serving a past you. And for me, same thing where like I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my channel. I was kind of floundering for a little while, trying this, trying this. But then I realized that like a past problem I had is that there was no advice for adventure creators. There's nobody out there serving adventure specifically. There's advice that are for like YouTube how-to or education or something like that. But a lot of the advice didn't apply. So kind of went through the same organic process. I think the lesson that I would pull out of this, and I'd be curious to hear what you guys think, is that it can take time. And in a lot of that is just like keeping your eyes wide open for the opportunities that might arise and just being aware of like, what are the gaps? You saw a gap and you filled it. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so, because it took us a lot of searching to get to I mean, this wasn't like something we honed in over like even 3 or 4 months. I mean, it took us a long time
Or
to
three
really dial it
years.
in. Yeah.
It took us a long time. And when we first were starting to look into being content creators or whatever title you want to give it, people were saying that it takes like 3 to 5 years. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. Nah, that's crazy. It's going to be faster than that. No, it's totally true. It takes a long time to create what you really want to build because you're constantly changing it and fine tuning it and fixing it too. And that's basically what we found along the way is we're fine tuning where we want to go. And actually, finding that need that was missing in the market also transitioned into finding what's missing with the art with the travel community is community. So so just from our writing about beer and meeting up with people on the road, we realized there was a missing piece of people missing out on meeting up with people on the road. So that's where we created another part of our business too.
Right. Because when you travel, even for just a significant amount of time, if not full time, you kind of give up that neighborhood that you have when you're in a house or an apartment or whatever. And so it's an adjustment because after time you're kind of like, wow, this can feel kind of lonely if you're not a really outgoing person who just meets people everywhere you go. It's most people are not that way.
So from that beer and from that connections that we have while we started traveling, we created a camp for adults called Camp Carpe Diem that puts all of that together to give a space for other people and other travelers to come together and meet their own tribe and meet their community. So now we have this camp that transitioned out of our other business. Be fluid too. If you're going to be creating content, is to be fluid and recognize how your business needs to change and kind of flow with it. We don't make a ton of money directly off of our website and off of our craft beer guides. But because of that website and because of those guides, it's shown us as experts in the field, and we've gotten other positions with other partners from that. And so I think that's a piece of, I think, expertise that we've learned from that is it's okay to transition off from one piece as long as it's still relating to what you really want to be doing.
So I want to deep dive into the camp, but before that, I want to quickly switch back and look at what did you do? What were the things you did that you decided to stop doing or like weren't worth your time? You've mentioned already like YouTube, you decided that wasn't worth it, but what other things did you guys try?
We haven't put a ton of anything new up on YouTube, but I don't know if I really want to say we're done with YouTube. It just has backed off our focus. So we do still have a channel and it's still kind of relevant. And if you want to see old interviews and things like that, that's fine. But I'm not ready to give up on that.
But
But
we are
yeah,
not focusing on creating YouTube content right now,
right.
though,
No.
at all.
But I know one thing is when we first started our website, Living a Stout Life, part of that I think was I treated it as my personal diary. So there were a few posts on there in the beginning that was just kind of feelings about how I was feeling about being on the road and traveling and starting this new adventure. And it really didn't, now it doesn't match with what we're doing. So I've definitely stopped like kind of writing like a personal diary thing on there. It's gearing more towards what do people need from our website and what does Living a Stout Life say. And so when you go to Living a Stout Life, basically if people are looking at, we hope to answer their question. Well, we're going here. So what does Living a Stout Life say about it? Or we're going to go visit here. What does Living a Stout Life recommend? And so there's definitely that piece that we've transitioned out of. We also did write a little bit about RV travel.
I wouldn't say that we went to too many different formats, different delivery mechanisms to try and deliver content. But we did kind of scatter around for job opportunities at times. As April was kind of talking about there a little bit ago, we get some of our income is derived from doing some freelance work for other companies. And at one time it was kind of like, oh, where can we make money? And instead of doing that, it's like what dovetails into our business and adds to our business while we're still making money by working with someone else. So we've been much more intentional about who we work with and the products we work with, the different companies that we write content for other companies sometimes, such as for us we work with a malting company that does the malt for beer, and that just fits really well into what we do anyway. So it's a nice cycle for us that we keep things in the neighborhood of what we want to focus on in the first place.
And which platforms or places that you've put your content out have you added in and chosen, like decided that were worth it? I know you guys have, you said Instagram, you have Facebook, you have a podcast, you have a newsletter. How have you chosen each of those elements, and how have you chosen whether or not to continue them?
Our newsletter we used to put out once a week, and I thought it was just kind of useless information. I was just repeating things that I'm just like, what value is this? Nobody's reading this. There's no value to it. I'm just putting something out that's already on social media. I'm just basically, to me, it just didn't seem to have a value the first few years that we did it. And once a week just took a lot of time. So I slowly transitioned that out, redesigned it. So we do try to send out our newsletter like every other week, but sometimes that gets pushed to the wayside. But I've revamped the newsletter to kind of be more streamlined. So it has a very brief, tried to be very brief about like where we're at in the world, because part of where we're at in the world is what the content is that you're going to be getting. And then we'll have like something that is our podcast episode is this, and we put out this new beer guide on the website is this. And then I try to pull pieces that might be relevant to other people, like news. So any kind of craft beer news that's out there in the world, or any kind of traveling news that's out there in the world. And then we also do like recommendations and events. So people can, there's like a resource now with our newsletter. Like if you're looking as a traveler or wherever you happen to be to go to some, cool music event or some beer event, it's hopefully going to be like a piece of what our newsletter is. So you're not just getting regurgitated stuff. It's something that it could be kind of a resource for you.
I mean, podcasting was a big switch for us that made a lot of sense, as we were doing long form interviews on YouTube, which if you're not Joe Rogan, it's kind of hard to pull that off. So it just made sense to go to podcasting. And once we did, it's like, it just flowed much better. I don't know, I find it much more invigorating than spending a lot of time on videos and stuff that just didn't seem interesting to me. So I like the interviews that we did when we were delivering via YouTube, but we didn't need to do it via YouTube, and we didn't need to spend so much time on the video editing side. I think it made more sense on the podcast side, and it fit our workflow better doing it on the podcast side.
What was your reasoning for having the podcast at all? Like why video or in a podcast form? Why?
Because we like the community around craft beer. So as far as providing guides for people on where to go for great beer and adventures and such is one great element. But we like to connect them to what makes these places special, that why we recommend, out of 25 breweries in Tucson, why would we recommend Catalina Brewing, or why would we recommend Moto Sonora over the other breweries here? And because there is a story behind that brewery, and it's conveyed in everything they do. So we think that community is really a big part of what makes a place special.
I totally feel that. I actually did an interview with Mount Brewing Company a couple of years ago, and I was drinking this orange milk stout, which, by the way, I don't know if you guys know this, but I stopped drinking completely. So anyways, I was drinking an orange milk stout, and it was so delicious. It was really good. But then the guy started telling the story of how he wasn't able to go home during COVID, and he really missed the Terry's chocolate oranges that you crack and they have little pieces come out. And as I was drinking the beer and he was telling the story, I swear to God, I could taste the chocolate. I could feel the feeling of him opening it up on Christmas. Like the whole story made that beer so much better. So I totally feel what you're talking about.
Well, and that's when we talk to people all the time, they say, what's your favorite brewery or your favorite beer or whatever? And there's too many great ones out there to just say, oh, this is my favorite or that. But the ones that we always gravitate to have something more than just the beer to it. There's a lot more behind it than just the beer or even the place. And so we like to tell those stories behind it, because I think it dovetails really nicely into the guides. And when we guide you to different places, we can also tell the story behind some of those places. and give you an even more meaningful experience to look forward to.
So what other platforms? You've talked about the podcast, the newsletter. What about like social media, like some like platforms with algorithms?
Like Facebook and Instagram, and we focus for the most part on both of those, but I feel like our focus is leaning more towards Instagram and less on Facebook.
We're
What do you
doing
think?
both because we're still getting, despite the changes to Facebook, it's getting really hard for bigger companies to get reach out there. But I feel like we're still in a position where we connect with a lot of people on Facebook. So we still are putting effort into it. It's not like we spend hours and hours and hours every day on it, but Instagram and Facebook still tend to be our big engagers. But that being said, I'm probably gonna have to cave and get into TikTok and give it a shot. And I've just been very leery of adding more things just because they're the hot thing. And I know TikTok sounds like it can really explode for people. I've seen the stories of different people and even people I know that I'm like, okay, that's true because I know this person. I know they're not bullshitting me. It's like this really happened. They really got 5,000 new followers overnight because of one little thing. And so I probably will break down and adventure into the realm of TikTok somehow.
I'm in this community called The Lab. It's organized by Jay Klaus, and he runs like the biggest creator podcast out there. And they had a workshop where they talked about like how to choose different platforms. And he said that one of the things that you have to be really careful of is you hear these stories of like people exploding and then you gravitate towards a new platform. But the reality is that a lot of these times, if you're exploding, that's not your audience. That's it's something's going viral and that's not your audience. That's not that people are going to pay for your guides or like buy a product or like be like core audience. He's like, you really want to focus on like what will grow my core audience, not what will grow my audience. And for me, I'm personally gonna keep away from TikTok because they're too young and they can't afford the people to know can't afford the things that I want to do. So that's the only thing I would say to that is look at like who are the people that use these platforms.
That's a really good point because I have been really hesitant to jump in, not because I thought of it quite in that manner, but also it's like, do I want to add one more thing just because it's the hot thing and maybe it's going to do something for me? I want to be more intentional about it. So that's putting it in that perspective really helps make me think, okay, I need to delve into a little more research about it first and see if it's really going to, if it's going to make sense for our audience.
It's still been iffy and it's just still been something on the back of our brain that maybe we should look into it, but we haven't acted up on it yet.
Yeah, well, I just wrote my module about this and on what each platform like represents and what you get out of it. And like they say, like Facebook is going to be your older generation, like your 55s plus. They're the people with money to spend. And so I actually stayed on Facebook because I was like, oh, I don't want to be on here. But in sailing, everyone's old people with money, you know? And then like things like Twitter, for example, is if you want to be a thought leader, like if you want to be someone who represents thoughts and you lead people in whatever sector you're in, which for me like probably makes sense, but I haven't made the jump because I don't really want to be over there right now. And then of course like Instagram's like my age, like the millennials and people who are like starting to get adventuring. So I think the fact that you guys are turning towards Instagram is like a really good call right now. And there's a new one that I just heard of, Blue something or another. But I don't know much about that one yet. So yeah. I wanted to ask you, you guys mentioned that you in your newsletter, and you've said this a couple of times, that you wanted to make sure that it wasn't valuable, right? You said you're like, oh, there was no value there. How do you define value for your audience and just like generally?
I want to give our readers like something that I was going to say something that they'd find valuable, but that doesn't define it. Something that will help them in their travels, because we'll constantly get texts from friends or people we've met on the road like, oh, I'm going to New York City. What brewery should I go to? Or, oh, I'm going, to Kentucky in Louisville. What brewery should I go to? We're constantly getting that. So that to me is something that I want to make sure, like, if we went to these breweries, people are looking to us for recommendations. To me, like, that is kind of a valuable piece to what our audience would want. So on the bottom part of our newsletter, it has like, oh, the places we went. And then I do a very brief like listing of a few of the breweries that we went to, for example, or a mountain biking trail that we went to. So people see that, and I call them like resources. And more people are clicking on those to find out like more about the brewery itself. So it's kind of bringing, hopefully, who knows, it's hard to track any kind of data on that, more traffic per se to the brewery's website. So then they can go to that brewery and see it through that. And to me, you're not repeating something that's already on our website or already on our social media channel. So granted, when we put up a new post on our website, for example, Kenny will put it, he's a social media person. He'll push it out via social media and push it out via whatever groups we're on and push out the article for that. And then I'll take it and put it on the newsletter too. So there are multiple ways for our audience to get that. But to me, if you're only doing that in the newsletter and only taking what you already have on your website, it's just kind of like copying, and it's like a copycat. It's like you're not doing anything. But if I can add a little bit of those extra tidbits to what's going on in the world besides what's going on in our world in our website, then it's a little bit more value to our readers. So they have something that's a little bit wider expanse than just living a style life.
And it's interesting because it seems like you went on a very similar journey to a lot of creators that I've talked to, which is that like at first you were just trying to talk about like what it was like with this lifestyle, but that doesn't add enough value. So you actually had to like end up asking that question more, which is how can I add value? And I look at a lot of vloggers out there, especially, and they're just like talking about their lives and I did this and I did this, and they're not growing. Some people do, they can get lucky, people get lucky, but most of us need to switch our gear and start adding more value, I would say.
Right. I think what I've seen, especially in the RV space, is people who focus more on, the RV travel side of the thing, is that to keep growing, they become the story. So it's almost like watching a reality show, and if you're comfortable being that, if you like to create content about your everyday life and that's entertaining and people want to watch it, cool. But that's not what we do. I mean, we probably would be entertaining because we're I think pretty funny. Not intentionally, but just the things that happen between us every day are
Well, the
funny.
problem with that is we always forget to record stuff. So
and I also think that like there's not everyone can do that. Like, and I think that like yes, they become the story, but it's also because like the data showed that they could do that, and I came up, I've mentioned this in other podcasts, but like I came up with what I called the vlogger formula. And it's typically like a pretty unique story, a pretty unique place, beautiful people who have really, really shitty boats, or people who have really amazing boats, but not really the in between. And it's a couple of other things, but like it's not completely like you can see why it works for some people and why it doesn't for other people, I think.
At some point you are somewhat of a performer at that point, and I'm not saying that people are making this all up. I'm just saying that you have to be comfortable in the camera and be okay with recording all the time and everything, and recording every little thing to get that. And there's got to be that hook. There's got to be something that hooks people. So, and that's just not something for everyone. And, it's just like when we hit the road, and it's like, we focused a lot initially on people who travel in RVs to go to breweries. It's like, okay, that's great. But there's a lot more people that go to breweries than just travel in RVs to go to breweries. So, there are a lot of travelers that go to breweries. So that's a big audience. But if we narrowed it down to just full-time RV travel to breweries, that's way too narrow.
If you're enjoying this episode, then I also recommend that you sign up for my newsletter, where every 2 weeks I share research-backed and tested advice on how to start, grow, and monetize your adventure creator business with a focus on YouTube. Now, my newsletter is extra special in the next couple of months because I will be releasing the first version of my adventure creator course and community to my newsletter. So you'll get access for 1 year, and if you're part of my newsletter, that means that you will get a discount code, a very generous one actually, and you'll get access to an affiliate link so you can actually monetize off of referring other creators. So there's a link in the description, a link in the bio, and enjoy the rest of the episode. What topics do you find resonate the most with your audience?
correct me if I'm wrong, Kenny, but I think with our podcast, it seems to be that like more our popular podcast episodes are probably more when it's travel with a little bit of beer kind of thrown in, instead of just when it's a full on like brewery with just a little bit of travel thrown in. Does that make
Yeah, like I would say, especially if it's somebody who's not famous in the beer world or whatever. Like there's a brewer in Breckenridge, Colorado, Jason Ford, who started Broken Compass Brewing there, and he made the move from engineer to mountains, blah blah blah. Kind of generic story at that point, but he's also a big Burning Man guy who's been to Burning Man like several years in a row building the man, and he tells this whole story about Burning Man in it, which makes it a whole nother facet of interesting
Mm-hmm.
besides just the beer,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And then on the website, I would say that the guides do very well as far as like when we do in-depth guides about where to find beer in certain places. That, and then also when we talk about going to unique places. So it's not necessarily always a guide to the beer, but also a guide to a place sometimes. So it is mostly the guides. People tend to gravitate towards the articles that give them information on finding out about this place they want to go to and where they should go when they're there.
We're trying to focus more now too on, like, we're writing in-depth guides, like the ultimate guide. Like Kenny, we just spent a month this last spring, we just spent a month in Medellin in Colombia. Like I said, we're trying to expand into different countries and stuff. And so Ken just finished an entire, like literally it is the ultimate guide to finding craft beer in Medellin in Colombia. And it was intense. So like that whole thing is, we hope that's going to blow up and we can get that out to a whole lot of other um, travel bloggers that don't get so much in depth into beer. But then, so that is really going to help with that. But then we're also trying to take those big, huge in-depth guides and break them down into quick sips kind of thing. So if you only have like a day or two, these are the 3 places you must go. So we're trying to kind of create multiple pieces of content from one topic per se.
And that's also one of the things that, like, as I'm going through and I'm preparing for the launch of my course, one of the pieces of advice that I got was that, like, people will be more likely to make a big purchase from you if they've already made a small purchase from you that they've learned brings value. So you're like, it's almost like incremental trust. And they'll eventually, they might put your time or effort or whatever it is, money into something bigger, but you can't just expect them from 0 to 100. You have to, like, kind of make stepping stones along the way. Although these guides, it sounds like they're free. It's a free resource you're providing. Why have you chosen to do it for free? Why not provide them? Why not have them be paid?
The honest answer is I mean, like, I wouldn't pay for it. So for me, I'm a cheapskate. I think, honestly, I feel like I'm not going to
That
pay
could
for
be it.
something if I can get it for free somewhere else. That's just how I think sometimes. And then hopefully, maybe ultimately, once we really, because it did literally, this focus probably just came into play within the last couple of years, that this really focus on beer guides. So maybe once we've gotten more like built up and built up, it becomes more of a valuable resource that it could be something that we end up turning into.
I think,
I
I think honestly, we didn't really consider too much of creating guides that we would sell. And I'm not sure why. I honestly don't say. We did a lot of research and went, oh, just nobody's going to pay for that or something like that. We really didn't do that research to do market analysis on it to see if somebody would pay for that. But I think we kind of dove into, we're going to build this our goal for a long time has been to build our website up, to build the traffic up, to monetize the website as best we can in different ways. And we do that right now through things like affiliate marketing and such. But
But I
yeah,
also no, I also think that our guides are a way to connect to other people and to connect to other travelers. And for me, I just don't know if I wanted to put a paywall in front of that to say, no, sorry, you can't have it. Like, this is what we've learned and we want to share that with you because it's just this whole community of people that we love. And so I think that's really kind of it. I think I would struggle with trying to have someone pay for those. I want to share that wealth of information without having to have.
I think this is interesting because what I'm trying to get at here and what I think is super valuable is understanding the thought process that people have when they make business decisions. I mean, you guys have been traveling around for, this is your 4th year, you said?
5.
5 years? Okay, so you've been traveling on for 5 years. You found a way to bring in money for 5 years, and you're not necessarily like trying to monetize everything or doing heaps of research about every decision you make. And I can feel I hope you guys don't mind me saying this, but I can feel maybe a slight bit of embarrassment when I ask that question. And I think what's important here is that, like, you guys have made this work. You are a model for other people out there who've made this work. And you didn't necessarily research everything because we don't always have the freaking capacity. Like, there's so much going on. There's so much to do. And what you guys are showing is this is the reality. This is what it looks like, right? This is you can't possibly think through every decision so in depth. Otherwise, you're going to burn out.
No, and that's true. And like looking back on it, maybe it would make sense to do, our quick hit things and lead that into the in-depth guide that maybe you pay a subscription for or are part of Patreon or something like that. But honestly, we didn't really think of it that way when we were building it. It was more a way to build the website and make the website a good resource. And so we've kind of focused more like with the guides. We have the in-depth guides. Then we have, podcasts like, say, for Medellin, for instance. April did an article on things you need to consider when you go to Medellin. Just kind of a travel guide more than a beer guide that takes in account everything about how to travel, get around the city, safety concerns you should have before you go, different things like that, travel stuff. And then I have this in-depth beer guide, and they kind of dovetail together. We also have 3 podcast episodes that we recorded in Medellin with different brewers while we were there. And so they all kind of link back around to each other. And for us, that was a way to make us an authority on Medellin and the Medellin craft beer scene. So we're hitting it from many different angles to build up some cornerstone content and make ourselves an authority so that when people do a search for Medellin craft beer or Medellin breweries, we're going to come up right near the top, if not at the top.
And then that kind of brings up another point, which is that, like, you had a goal and then you worked your way backwards. And I think that, like, when I was asking that question, I was thinking of a specific goal and working my way backwards, where having like a stepping stone paid product would make sense for a bigger paid product, but that's not your goal, right? Like, you're not trying to lead there. So, like, thinking about what the end goal is can also affect each and every decision that you guys make. Do you think that your podcast, your newsletter has helped make people eventually buy join your camp?
Definitely.
And it totally has. I mean, because now we can offer like sponsorship levels for Camp Carpe Diem, and we have our podcasts that could have, like, ad rolls in there. Like, it can have an ad spot in our podcast in there if you want to do a sponsorship level for Camp Carpe Diem. Or people, if we'll totally happily, if it's a company that matches up with what we're doing, we'll do guest posts with companies that help us put together Camp Carpe Diem. So it's just built up a huge partnership level for us with that.
Tell me about your camp. How is it structured? How have you chosen the structure and to, like, meet your audience's needs, and how has it evolved?
It started because we went to a conference before we moved into the RV. We went to this conference called the RV Entrepreneur Conference, and it was just literally what it says. It's a conference for RVers who want to work from the road and how to do that. So they had all these different content creators. They had all these different people talking about Pinterest, talking about YouTube, talking about, all the different ways you can put content out there.
What's Pinterest?
Pinterest. Still around.
I think so.
All that different stuff going on. And then plus what they also had is something called attendee-led meetups. And so that was kind of our first foray into it, is you can apply to do some kind of a course or lesson or something while you're at the conference. And Kenny and I were like, we should do something with craft beer. So we did this attendee-led meetup with people who were there at this conference about, like, how to taste beer. And we had different beers, and people signed up for it, and it was a lot of fun. And so that was that. And we moved on, and we met some great people at this conference. Well, like a year or so after the people that we met, we ended up traveling together with, and we were like sitting around a campfire one time, beer in hand, because you know what happens when you have beer in hand sitting around a campfire. Ideas, like, woo!
Ideas flow.
Most of those ideas never come to fruition, but for some reason, our business partners and friends, Deborah and Barry, they're from the virtual campground. We were talking, and we're like, what if we did this camp that was like an attendee-led meetup from RVE, and where we put all these people together to have fun instead of working? Like, it's just a fun camp. There's no work involved whatsoever. And we're like, sure, why not? and whatever. And we're like, sure, cheers. And then we kind of moved on. And I do not recall how it actually became real, but all of a sudden we're like, well, shit, we're doing this. It's real. We have to actually plan this camp now.
Yeah, that was just, we just started.
Yeah.
And once you start, you just make things
It,
happen. But I think the big focal point for
yeah.
me, when we were sitting around the campfire talking, was these were friends of ours that we met at this summit, and they became kind of part of our traveling neighborhood for all intents and purposes. We built a community of travelers around the country that almost wherever we went, if we wanted to be around somebody, we could, so we could have a community. But a lot of people don't get that when they travel. They don't know how to build up a community when they travel. And so that's what this really was, is a way to bring people who have common interest together to have a fun weekend and connect with other people. And then they've built community.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the people that have come to our camps still meet up all the time when they're just traveling away from us. It has nothing to do with us anymore, other than we maybe introduced them at one point.
How do you ensure that the people who show up keep engaging with you guys? I mean, they have obviously like gone through this process of like, they built trust, they like what you do, they were willing to give you money, they showed up. Then what?
I think our campfires honestly have a huge thing to do with that. It's just the gathering. Also, I was going to say we keep it small. It's intimate.
Yeah.
We max it out at 50 participants because we don't want it to be where everybody can't meet everybody. We want it to be something where everybody can hang around a campfire and talk, and everybody can meet everybody. And so everything we do is kind of based around that community of connecting them together. And then also just giving them the space to talk. Not everybody's going to get along with everybody else. And so that's what's really great is when the four of us, Deborah, Barry, and Kenny and I, when we back up and we look at everybody else who just met and they're all talking. And then we use WhatsApp as a platform for all of our conversations and like notifications and what's going on next day. We also see that communication, that connection with everybody continues long after the camp.
I would say that keeping it small like that has been challenging from a business perspective because it limits your growth, obviously, if you want to keep it small and intimate. And it's a much more difficult proposal to pitch to businesses to be sponsors, right? To get them involved in a camp when it's like, oh, you have 50 people there. Okay, that's a big advertising ask. But we've found ways to integrate what we do outside of our camp into our pitch for sponsors as well. So, for instance, doing, say, a social media campaign, like not only are you sponsoring this camp and, whatever, maybe you're presenting your product in front of the people at the camp, then we're also putting together, say, a 3-post Instagram campaign over time that plays into some goal that this company has. And also, we can provide content out of that camp, especially if it's somebody who has a product. This last camp we had a company called Hammock Universe participate, and they really jumped in towards the last minute, and they gave us some hammocks to put out for people to hang out in and stuff. And it went over really well, and we got a lot of great photos of people using it and stuff, and they were really excited. And now we've brought Hammock Universe on as our presenting sponsor for our next one, because we presented some different ways that we could do some more far-reaching marketing for them through our websites and through our social media platforms to make the event more than just the event.
Do you have any advice for people who are trying to get these sponsorships? Because I hope you guys, again, hope you don't mind saying this, but like one of the things that really appealed to me about talking to you guys is you guys don't have a huge social media following, and yet you've made this work. And I think that like your story is one that really can appeal to people. So how can small channels or small social media followings get to that point where they're like able to ask sponsors? What's your advice?
My advice would be try to think of what that company could use. Like it's great when you say, I really like, say, Hammock Universe. If I said, hey, I really like your hammocks, we bought one of your hammocks 3 years ago and we use it every day, blah, blah, blah. It'd be fun to work together. Well, okay, that's great, right? But how does that help Hammock Universe? Other than, yes, it's really nice word of mouth and you're going to say nice things about their product because you obviously enjoy it. But you have to think about, like, are they expanding into a different market? Like for us, Hammock Universe is a Canadian based company and they're pushing into the United States a lot. And so I think for us, it was good timing to try and work with them because we can help them reach people who would use that type of product are the type of people that we connect with. So we can come up with marketing campaigns and things that help them expand their footprint in the United States.
I was going to also say, like, take what your interests are and what your wannabe sponsors' interests are. For example, Sacred Waters Brewing Company, they were our platinum sponsor for our opening night social last year's Camp Carpe Diem in Kalispell, Montana. But what you like, they're the ones who we brewed a beer with them, and they did our whole opening night social with food and free beers and all that. But the thing is with that is how we made that work is we have connections with Malt Europe, which is a malting company. You need malts for beer. We had connections with Roy Farms, which is a hop farm. You need hops for beer. So we brought all of these connections that we have together, and basically they brewed an entire batch for their whole brewery to sell. We only needed a small portion of it. So they gave us that as a sponsor. So it doesn't always have to be a monetary sponsor. So if you're looking for something to help you grow your camp or grow your event, what's going to do that? So it doesn't have to be a monetary sponsorship as well.
And to jump in on that and to give you a little more perspective on brewing that beer and why it made sense. Malt Europe Malting Company and Roy Farms Hops are always looking to sell to new customers, right? And Sacred Waters was not a customer for either one of them on the regular, at least yet. So they offered discount product. We were able to brew a beer with Sacred Waters that cost them probably half or less than half as much as a normal batch of beer,
which they're going to brew anyhow.
So there's incentive there for Sacred Waters to want to work with us because we're like, hey, we can help put this together. Yes, you're brewing a beer for us, but now you're going to have still 20 kegs left when you're done with us that you can sell in your tap room, and it costs you a fraction of what you normally spend on a beer.
The biggest thing is like you said
so
earlier.
So we put people together.
Yes, we put people together. Is what is going to benefit them, not how are they going to help us.
And I think it's interesting because it goes back to something that I've been saying in a couple of other podcasts, which is that when you want to grow a business, especially in content creation, where I say trust is the biggest currency, that you have to come at everything from a service mindset. That you're serving your audience, you're serving the sponsors, like you are serving everyone around you, and your business will grow as a result of that. But if you're thinking of yourself first, you're not going to grow.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, that's perfectly how it's worked for us, is that the more focus we have put on everybody else and just kind of like forget about us, it's like, how many dollars are we going to make? We'd like to make as much money as possible, of course, just like everybody, but that's not our focus at the end of the day. Is like, can we make $200,000 off of this?
How did you guys find the information, by the way, about the hammocks trying to expand into the US? Because that kind of information I think is super valuable. So how do people go about finding that?
So I'm so excited. You know what? People are so terrified of cold calls. Dude, you have to make cold calls. This was a literal, complete Google search cold call. That was all it was. And I must have connected with somebody, the right timing, the right person, the right words. I had no connections to these guys whatsoever. So that's all I have to say that one. But on that note, you still it's definitely easier when you have connections with people, or you can not really throw out names, but just have true, genuine similar passions to something. So when you reach out to somebody, you actually aren't just putting out some generic email that says, hey, we have this event, please join us because we can help you do this. It needs to be something that's really heartfelt and true with you. And that's probably how it maybe kind of worked out with the cold call with Hammock Universe. is
Well,
I really wanted a chill zone. I wanted what's called the chill zone. And I said our attendees wanted it. And I want a hammock. And you guys look great. And so we want you to be our chill zone sponsor. It's kind of how it first started.
Before I started my current business, The Audacious Path, many years ago, I started Tin Can Translations, which was supposed to be a language access company that helps get interpreters into hospitals because there's a huge problem in the US around this. And it was something that I had worked in, I had experience in, I had this thought that it was this big gap I could enter. But if I'm completely honest, I did not give two shits about it. Like I was doing it completely for the money. And I would get on these cold calls and I just like completely floundered. I felt so uncomfortable. I was going through the motions of what I thought I was going to do based on like the research I'd done, the things I'm supposed to say. And now, just today or yesterday, actually, I got this massive channel. They've got 200,000 subscribers. They're going to do an interview with me in a week or two. And I felt so comfortable reaching out to them and just like bugging them, to be honest. I kept following up because I care so much about what I'm doing. Like I really want to help creators. I really want to pass on this information. And just like what you said, make it heartfelt. You can feel the authenticity that it comes through in your ability to have those conversations and how you're interacting in it. People can pick up on that. And if you don't give a shit about what you're doing, if you're just there for the money, that's going to come through. Would you agree?
I do.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%, 100%. When we jumped into the RV and hit the road and knew we wanted to build a website and such, that was again why we didn't want to just do the RV thing like everybody else, because it's like I don't want to learn how to build a website about RVing to teach other people how to build a website about RVing and just follow this cycle. And we wanted it to be more authentic. And I think when you are authentic, it just comes through. So
I want to know if you guys have any lessons that you got in your creator business that you think can apply to other creator businesses. Like, what are just some key things you've pulled out throughout all of this?
It takes a long time. So keep doing it. Don't give up. If you're doing something that you really enjoy, it does take time and it does take I mean, you're an entrepreneur. If you're a content creator and you're doing it on your own, you're an entrepreneur. And creating something from a startup, it takes time. So you can't just think that it's going to happen overnight. That's the best thing, the biggest thing I would think right there is don't give up on it.
and also realize there are a lot of parts to it that aren't always going to be fun either. There are going to be a lot of parts that you're not passionate about.
Thank you for that.
If you building a business takes a lot of business side too, that marketing it. If you're not big on marketing, you gotta figure out how to handle it. Even if that means you're in the position where you can hire someone else to market you still have to do the legwork and find the right person to help you and things like that. There's a lot of effort that goes into building a business besides the fun parts that you enjoy doing and that you are super passionate about.
I just think always be open to what comes your way as well, because if you're just so rigid in what you think you want, you're going to miss out on something that's could be out on the outer edges. And like having a good focus on something is good because you do need to focus. But if you have complete tunnel vision, you're just missing out on something that's on the outer edges. So be able to like see a little bit further than what you're looking for, I guess.
The way I think about it is like having open eyes with discernment. And I think discernment is something that entrepreneurs need to develop as a skill, that you need to discern what is good for your business and what is bad for your business. Because I love this quote. I don't remember who said it, but someone was like, one of the best things you can learn as an entrepreneur is to keep your eyes open and learn to say no. How can people find you?
livingastylelife.com. You can find us Craft Beer Travel and Adventure podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts.
And on social media, it's also going to be Living a Stout Life.
And then Camp Carpe Diem, if you're interested in learning more about that, sponsoring it, or even joining, because we'd love to have you guys, or just even talking to us more about it, that's campcarpediem.com.
Thank you so much for having a listen. If you found any value in this podcast or you learned something, which I did, One of the easiest ways that you can say thank you is to leave a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or if you're on YouTube, you can leave a comment or a like below. And that really helps tell these various platforms that this podcast is worth pushing, and it helps me reach more creators that need to hear this advice. So thank you so much. I genuinely appreciate it. I can't say that enough, and I will see you guys in 2 weeks.